Imagine standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon. Beneath you are nearly 2 billion years of exposed rock, endless cliffs, hidden caves, and places so remote that some have never been fully explored. Now imagine someone telling you that deep inside those canyon walls lies a forgotten underground world, one spoken of by Native American traditions for centuries, and later described in one of the most controversial newspaper stories ever published in the United States. It sounds like the beginning of a fantasy. Yet the story didn't begin with explorers, archaeologists, or conspiracy theories. It began with the Hopi people, whose oral traditions have been carefully preserved for generations. Long before the Grand Canyon became a national park, Hopi elders spoke of a sacred world beneath the earth. They described vast underground chambers, hidden passages, and mysterious beings who lived below the canyon long before the present world existed. According to some traditions preserved within the Bear clan, these beings were intelligent, powerful, and offered shelter to the ancestors of the Hopi during times of great catastrophe. Then, in April 1909, something remarkable happened. An Arizona newspaper published a front-page story claiming that an explorer working with the Smithsonian Institution had discovered a hidden cave deep inside the Grand Canyon. According to the report, the cave contained enormous chambers, preserved mummies, strange artifacts, and symbols unlike anything previously documented in North America. The story spread rapidly. Then, almost as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. No photographs were ever released. No artifacts were displayed. No official archaeological report followed. More than a century later, people are still asking the same question. Was the Arizona Gazette reporting an extraordinary discovery that somehow disappeared from history, or was it simply one of the greatest newspaper hoaxes ever printed? Even more intriguing is this. Why did the newspaper's description sound so similar to traditions the Hopi had already been preserving for countless generations? To answer that, we have to travel back long before the newspaper, before modern archaeology, and before anyone attempted to explain the mysteries hidden within the Grand Canyon. Because the oldest part of this story was never written in a newspaper. It was remembered. For the Hopi, this was never just folklore. It was part of a sacred history passed from one generation to the next through oral tradition. According to their beliefs, humanity did not begin in the world we know today. Before the present age, there were earlier worlds, each ending in catastrophe before a new one began. When those disasters came, the ancestors of the Hopi were guided to safety beneath the earth. The place where they eventually emerged into the present world is known as the Sipapu, a sacred opening that symbolizes humanity's arrival into this world. Unlike many creation stories, the Hopi tradition is deeply connected to the landscape itself. These accounts are tied to real places across northern Arizona, making them an important part of Hopi cultural identity rather than simply symbolic tales. Among the most fascinating figures in these traditions are the beings often called the Ant People. Despite the name, they were not described as ordinary insects. Hopi accounts portray them as intelligent inhabitants of the underground world who offered protection during times of great upheaval. Some traditions describe them as taller than humans. Others say they were covered with hair. Nearly all agree on one point: they lived beneath the earth, inside vast underground chambers, long before the ancestors emerged into the present world. For centuries, these stories remained exactly where they belonged, within Hopi tradition, carefully preserved by elders and passed down through generations. Then, in the spring of 1909, a newspaper published a story that sounded strangely familiar. Suddenly, what had existed only in oral tradition seemed to echo through the pages of modern history. On April 5, 1909, readers of the Arizona Gazette were greeted by a headline that sounded almost unbelievable. The newspaper claimed that an explorer named G.E. Kincaid, reportedly working on a government-sponsored expedition connected with the Smithsonian Institution, had uncovered a hidden cave deep inside the Grand Canyon. According to the article, reaching the entrance was nearly impossible. It was said to be carved high into a sheer canyon wall, hundreds of feet above the Colorado River, accessible only by boat and a dangerous climb. But it was what lay inside that captured everyone's imagination. The report described a vast underground complex stretching deep into the rock. A long central corridor supposedly branched into dozens of chambers filled with carefully arranged pottery, copper tools, weapons, carved statues, and stores of grain that had remained preserved for centuries. Then came the most astonishing claim. Several chambers reportedly contained seated mummies, wrapped and carefully preserved. The walls were said to bear strange symbols unlike anything recognized in North American archaeology, while some statues appeared to resemble artistic styles associated with ancient Egypt or Asia. Just 4 days later, the newspaper published a second article, expanding on the discovery instead of dismissing it. To readers in 1909, it didn't read like fiction. It sounded like one of the greatest archaeological discoveries ever made. And then, the story simply disappeared. As researchers dug deeper into the 1909 story, another question began to emerge. What if the real mystery wasn't the newspaper, but the canyon itself? The Grand Canyon isn't just one enormous valley carved by the Colorado River. Hidden inside its towering cliffs are thousands of natural caves, narrow tunnels, and limestone chambers formed over millions of years. Many are so difficult to reach that even today, large sections remain unexplored. That doesn't prove the Arizona Gazette story. But it does mean that the idea of hidden chambers inside the canyon isn't impossible. Then there's another detail that's often overlooked. In 1906, just 3 years before the newspaper published its famous article, the United States passed the Antiquities Act, giving the federal government authority over major archaeological discoveries on protected land. Any significant find inside the Grand Canyon would have come under federal control, making the Smithsonian's involvement sound believable in the context of the time, even though the institution has repeatedly stated it has no record of the expedition. So where does that leave us? Historians remain divided. Most believe the 1909 article was an elaborate newspaper hoax, written to attract readers during an era when sensational stories were common. Others point out that no one has ever explained why the article contains such specific measurements, detailed descriptions, and references to locations that are still extremely difficult to access today. And then there's the Hopi perspective. Unlike the newspaper, Hopi traditions never claimed to be archaeology or scientific evidence. They are sacred oral histories, passed from elder to elder for centuries. They speak of underground chambers, the Sipapu, the sacred place of emergence, and mysterious beings remembered as protectors during humanity's earliest ages. Whether those stories describe literal events or spiritual teachings is a matter of belief. But one thing is beyond debate. The Hopi were telling these stories long before anyone published a newspaper article about a hidden city beneath the Grand Canyon. And that coincidence? History often focuses on what we can dig out of the ground. But sometimes, the oldest clues survive in stories instead of stone. And perhaps that's why the Grand Canyon continues to captivate millions of people every year. Not because we know all of its secrets, but because we don't. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this documentary exploring forgotten history, archaeology, and ancient traditions, don't forget to subscribe. And tell me in the comments. Do you think the Hopi traditions and the mysterious 1909 Grand Canyon story are completely unrelated? Or could they both be preserving different pieces of the same forgotten past?